Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. And on this episode, we are looking at one of the most important areas of strategic planning today, accelerating the transition to a digital workforce. This episode is sponsored by DXC Technology, and I'm joined today by three subject matter experts from their organization. Let's start off by just introducing our guests here today. First, we have Russ Riley. Hey, Russ, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jason. Yes, Russ Riley, Sales Director, DXC Technology.
We have David Bowles. Hey, David, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jason. I'm David Bowles. I'm the Director of Operations for DXC Technology.
And Pete Loach, welcome. Please tell us a little about yourself.
Hi, Jason. Nice to meet you. And I'm one of many IT managers within DXC Technology, supporting our internal teams and, where necessary, some of our external customers.
All right. Excellent. Great to have all three of you with us. So I'm hoping today we can talk about some of the scenarios and some of the stories that really support key ways that a digital workforce really operates well in today's environment. So I had a few areas that I really wanted to get to in our conversation today, ways that I know that the DXC team is helping its clients and that you're advising as ways to become more digital, I guess you would say. So let's go around the table and on a few different topics. The first one I wanted to get into was the topic of virtual cloud migrations. It's certainly something that companies, if they haven't done it already, they're certainly thinking about it at this point in sort of their digital transformation plans, or at least trying to strategize over it. But it can mean a little bit of a different thing to different organizations. How are you positioning virtual cloud migration to your clients, and what are some of the benefits of it? Russ, maybe I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, Jason, that's a great question. So at DXC Technology, we have the pleasure of working with companies across every spectrum vertical that you could think of. So one of the things I've typically seen when folks are looking at a cloud migration, typically focused on a core business application that they no longer want on premise. It may be because there's an upgrade to the application. They don't want to have the capital expense to upgrade given hardware to support the new application. It could be, quite frankly, I deal with CIOs, CTOs that tell me all the time that they want to get out of the data center business. And so that's one of the places where we actually help them strategize and create a roadmap for cloud migrations. Again, typically it does start with a given core application to the business. It could be ERP, it could be a variety, whatever is actually running that business. So hopefully that's helpful, Jason.
Yeah. Something else I would sort of add to the conversation as a question. Are there certain triggers? Are there certain sort of noticeable concerns or issues that an organization is going to have that's really leading them to either pay more attention to this concept or evaluate it more closely? David, what's your experience been?
Sure. So, Jason, as we look at our workforce, it's becoming more and more physically distributed, globally distributed. And if you think about that impact and the on-premise data center that you may have, getting the right resources to be able to put their hands on the equipment and make the appropriate installs or updates, it could become more challenging, or it could even become more costly with travel and that sort of thing. So if you think about it in terms of moving into the cloud and no longer managing that physical infrastructure in the same that you do today, there's a lot of value of considering whether it's virtual private cloud or whether it's public cloud, moving that workload.
What does the effort actually look like? That's probably what a lot of companies considering this want to know, right? Pete, maybe this is one that you would be the right person to ask. But what does a cloud migration look like? What are companies usually expecting in terms of how many consultants they need, or the scope of such a project?
Well, first and foremost is always going to be good, positive planning for the entirety and realistic expectations and timelines. Getting a full grip of what you have and what you want to do with it, and then getting it moved into the cloud is just one step. Then you bring in either your own experts in those areas of the applications, and in cloud services, or you bring in a consultant such as DXC Technology to come in, assess what you have, and plan that path to move into a cloud environment. We've done it with many of our own services here at DXC, moving them from on-premise services or data center-based services to cloud-based of various types, both public and private clouds. And there's always a lot of trepidation in doing it because always seems like there's unknowns. But when it comes down to it, you're really just moving where everything's running. It's not a lot different than what it is when it's on premise or in your data center. It's just in a container, if you will, that the hardware is no longer your major concern. Whoever's providing that service is going to provide all the necessary hardware, maintenance, repairs, and everything else. So it's actually a load off of you and your team that doesn't have to be worried about anymore.
Are there particular systems, types of solutions that you would consider, the most ready or perhaps most popular to move first or to be ready for cloud migration? Or is it really kind of agnostic in terms of where an organization starts in this kind of a journey? I can throw this open to really any of you, I suppose. Russ, maybe do you want to start?
I'll throw a piece on that first. I can say that a few years back, it was really a few that were primed for the move. But today, it's really across the board. All the applications that we use, with very, very few exceptions, can be moved into a cloud environment. And daily, there are new applications that weren't previously able to be moved that are able to be moved today.
And I do want to add to that because I think it's important, Jason and Pete and David, that one of the things that we've been very successful with when helping customers look at a migration strategy, because it is a strategy, that is one of the things we're able to do is actually bring application teams in so that we can look at applications to see, quote unquote, if they are ready to make that migration to the cloud. There are times where you have legacy applications that has legacy code that does need to go through some type of update before you make that move to the cloud. But back to Pete's point, today is very different than 3, 4, 5 years ago in the cloud technology, the tools to use to migrate. So we have come a long way, but again, a strategy and looking at the application layer is absolutely a must.
And Russ was going to go exactly where I was going. I think it's easier to list out which workloads you can't move into the cloud, and those are typically very legacy workloads or a workload that's on a non-Intel platform, which could be a little bit more challenging.
All right, excellent. I wanted to move on to a topic that, I have to admit, it's really not one that I spend a lot of time on, but I know that for a lot of organizations, it's really crucial for so many of their workers. It's the idea of adopting virtual desktops and a virtual desktop infrastructure. I don't know, can one of you maybe start by giving kind of the overview of what that technology is really all about and some of the key advantages that the companies are looking to gain when they invest in it?
So this is David. I can kind of start off, and Russ and Pete jump in where you see fit. Virtual desktop infrastructure abstracts the computing environment that our end users are using from the physical desktops, laptops, mobile devices that they're used to using, and instead puts that in the cloud the same way that we put virtual machines today as replacements for servers in the cloud. So the benefit, number one, is you have tighter control within the cloud of that end user's desktop computing environment. You don't have to be concerned about that environment getting necessarily in the wrong hands with the appropriate security measures that I think we'll get into more detail about later. But overall, it simplifies the management.
This is Pete, and I'm going to jump in a little bit there, not to mention that it lightens the load of the desktop hardware. Now you no longer need to have a nice beefy machine sitting on the desk, whether laptop or desktop, that's super powerful, able to run all the apps locally and all of that. You can now move to a thin client or a very low-powered machine because all of the workload is in the VDI or virtual desktop environment. The server that it's running on is what's dealing with all that processing power. So it really becomes a better cost-effective method in the long run. Not to mention, ongoing support, running updates is so much easier for the support teams. And for a user, if there's problems, they can either log off or be asked to be forced logged off, their environment VDI reset, log back in, and it's fresh, clean, and ready to go with no problems again. So it makes it very simple.
And Pete, just to add, when you think about the thin client type environment, you think that you're typically chained down to one specific space. But if you have a mobile workforce that's out potentially selling with many different field offices, it doesn't matter that a thin client isn't necessarily directly configured for that VDI, whether it's a thin client at any on-site office, whether it's your mobile device, tablet, you can access that environment, or potentially even at an internet cafe somewhere. So it really, really makes it much easier to access your primary working environment than if you've got all that on your laptop or desktop today.
So, in your experience, is virtual desktop infrastructure something that companies are going to be looking at to enable specific initiatives like expansion, like a more mobile workforce, or is it really, in your experience, something that organizations are adopting all across their operations?
So, Jason, I would say that it typically starts with a use case. So, for example, if you look at a manufacturer distribution, do the people that are in a given warehouse need, back to Pete's point, do they need a full desktop? What are they really accessing day in and day out to do their job? So in some cases, like I said, you start with a use case where you have folks working in a warehouse who may just simply need access to email or maybe one or two core systems to do their job. So as opposed to having the capital expense and maintaining, that machine in a warehouse, you can actually have them go to a kiosk or a dumb terminal, as we were talking about earlier, and access that. So what we see is you start with a use case, and then typically once that bears out, you see that adoption across an organization.
All right. I want to move on to VPN access, and the idea of having strong VPN tools has got to be key, right? Does that really go hand in hand with investments in virtual desktop infrastructure?
So I'm going to jump in real quick because it's ironic we're talking about this, because when you look at actually how we are deployed at DXC Technology, we leverage client-based VPN all across the globe, quite frankly. So not only are we delivering this solution to our customers, but we actually deploy it and use it each and every day. So it is something that, again, you have to go through the steps to do anything right correctly, but it is absolutely key when you have folks that are spread out across the field. And it's in particular for those organizations that have compliance drivers. This is a great way to be in compliance and deliver a good end user experience, in my humble opinion.
It also allows you to open up internal resources that you don't necessarily want to open to public internet access. You might have an internal web page that you use extensively for your team members that you really don't want out in the public, out in the internet field to be viewed. Now, this could be housed on an internal machine, or it might even be a cloud-based that has a tunnel that's going through the VPN into your network and then to that cloud solution. But it's ensuring that that information stays private and within your company, not accessible to the outside world, or, if you will, hackers easily.
And just to add, even you could have secure applications without necessarily having a client-based VPN if you secure it at the source that it's being distributed. But the challenge is those systems may span across multiple sites, multiple applications being served out on multiple different servers. To establish those secure connections at the site requires a separate connection to each one of those items. But if you're in a client-based delivered application, that application client lives on a desktop, on a laptop. or there's multiple, I should say, client-based applications living on that desktop or laptop, you really have to have the client-based VPN to give that, without using the term directly, virtual private network experience as if that person is physically in the office and not at home or some remote location.
It also allows the user to have a more in the office feel wherever they are, whether it be home, in a hotel, on the beach, on a vacation, trying to fix a problem that they got called about. It makes the team members, the end team members experience much more robust with, relatively speaking, very simple effort.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, when I think about client-based VPN, I think it's clearly a very important tool. But can you talk at all about sort of how it actually fits into the idea of digital transformation? I mean, clearly it's a tool for remote work, like I said. Any other thoughts about is it something that really fits into the bigger picture there?
Well, when you look at digital transformation, right, we're talking about taking applications, taking them to the next level where they reside, if it's in a cloud-based solution. But when you talk about VPN, client-side VPN, we're talking about it. You can do all the transformation if you want, but if you can't have access to it in a good fashion, then what's the point of going through a digital transformation? So I look at it from the perspective of it's a connectivity tool to allow us to consume the things that we're doing on the digital transformation, if that makes sense, Jason.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, I want to move on to one more theme, and that's disaster recovery. And one of the approaches I know is, creating exact duplicates of on-premises servers, having even other measures in mind for disaster recovery. Let me maybe throw this out to all of you, but start with Russ again. What are some of those types of disaster recovery services that you advise to DXC clients, and maybe what are some of the particulars of what you're trying to accomplish or help your clients accomplish with those?
No, it's a great question. It's something that we are fortunate to work with customers all the time on. So the one thing when I start a conversation around disaster recovery, the first thing I ask a customer is, what is your internal SLA? Do you even have an internal SLA? And from there, what we start to dive into are the core business applications for that customer. And we almost basically grade them, right? From can't live without, business can still function if I don't have this other thing. So once you actually provide that roadmap and we do that grading, if you will, we can then put together a strategy of replication. So there are many tools in the marketplace, both public and private cloud providers can do them. My biggest thing about disaster recovery is companies will spend a lot of money but won't actually test it. And it is one of my big bugaboos. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about it. At a minimum, once you actually execute the plan and put it in place, you have to test it at a minimum once a year, and go through a full failover to make sure that your business indeed can stand up to an issue when it occurs.
And the other part of it is, a lot of people think, it'd be something where my building burns down, or a hurricane hits me, or some other type of disaster befalls the facility that your stuff is housed in. Once you're in the cloud, if you have disaster recovery set up properly, you're no longer susceptible to the physical problems because it can be moved all over the place. And David could talk to that a whole lot better than I can, I believe. But it also gives the IT folks of your company the peace of mind that in the middle of the night, if something goes bump, the world's not going to stop and they're not going to be up for the next 48, 72 hours straight trying to fix it, because it's a simple failover and everything's still running. Then you can go address the problem with a fresh, clear mind, knowing that everybody's still working while you're working on the problem.
So those are all good points. Russ, you kind of hit on it. If we bought insurance but we had no mechanism to guarantee or even test that insurance would work, then the insurance would be worthless. And that's effectively what we're talking about with DR. DR can be about your servers in the cloud. It can also be personal DR, so to speak, with the files that are living on laptops and desktops. If those are not backed up to the cloud and synced regularly, if you were to lose those files, how detrimental would that be to the business? So it's important to think about the DR solution as a holistic piece. And getting back to the testing element, if you don't test the DR when you set it up, how do you know that you've covered for all scenarios that your workforce, remote, on-site, or otherwise, has the same experience of wherever it lives today? So for instance, if servers live in the East, but we DR it to the West, and maybe we don't have dedicated connectivity into the West like we do in the East, if we don't think about it fully and we don't test it, we don't see those implications. I also want to point out, DR doesn't mean that your primary workload has to live in the cloud. DR could truly just be an insurance policy. Your workload still be on-prem, syncing deltas up to the cloud. And if you ever potentially need to pull the fire alarm, so to speak, you can go live into the cloud.
I was going to just throw one more piece into just what he was saying there. It also gives you the gambit of you've got a piece of hardware that needs maintenance of whatever type, a failed drive or something, some fans need to be replaced, and you need to turn it off. You can switch over to that disaster recovery instance and do your work, your service immediately without an impact to your people. There's so many different facets to having it out there at the ready for you, not just the disaster side of it, but daily business operations.
Is disaster recovery something that can be taken in stages? Is it something where, if you're on an IT team, you should be thinking, I don't want to even start planning this because we don't have, these other key components in place yet? Or how do you address those kinds of concerns that we're not ready or not mature enough? I don't know. Similar concerns.
Well, I'll take this one, Jason. I would tell you that it goes back to my opening comment on disaster recovery. So A, yes, you can take it in steps, but B, this is where sitting down and truly taking inventory and prioritizing the inventory of what runs your business. What is mission critical? Look at those mission critical systems, create a plan around those, and then, yes, you can step later to the ones that aren't as mission critical. Some folks just do an all or nothing mentality. That can be very costly. So I think, to your point, Jason, doing it in a staged environment and looking at what's mission critical, you can do this quite cost effectively.
That's exactly what I was going to say as well. It's you pick the things that cause the most pain. If they fail, that's what you focus on, and just move through the stack until eventually either everything that can cause you pain is moved, or literally everything has a disaster recovery.
And I would just add, if you're not sure where to start, probably the easiest thing to do is start with your data. Not necessarily all the servers and all the images and everything else, but just the data that you cannot afford to live without. I think back in the older days, probably about 15 years ago, when we did backups, we would back up to tape and we would copy that tape backup. One would go on site in a fireproof safe, and the other one may go 30 or 40 miles away, so that if there was some geographic, devastation occurring, we can mitigate against that. Once that data is gone, you never get it back again. And there's countless companies that we've heard stories about losing that data. So if nothing else, at least ensure that a copy of your data is securely kept somewhere in the cloud.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here in the last half hour or so. Is there anything else that any of you would like to add? I don't know, that maybe ties together some of these different types of digital transformation areas and services and steps that companies are taking?
So in our operating environment of a lot of remote workers, it's really important that we focus on securing through multiple mechanisms the way that they access their resources within our corporate environment. Having a multi-factor authentication tool provides a second layer of security by via either having a cell phone that has the MFA software, having a tote or some other device that end user must physically have in their possession before they can access the resource.
And I'll throw one more piece on there. Another thing of moving into the cloud with digital transformation is also that as a company grows, a cloud environment is easily expandable for them. So rather than having to go out and buy new hardware, add more servers, add more RAM or drive locally, you reach out to your cloud provider and say, I want more, and it's there. It's practically that simple and allows you to be much more nimble in your growth.
The other interesting thing I'm taking away just from listening to each of you is perhaps an appreciation of advances that have been made, perhaps on a continuous basis over the last 3 years, 5 years, and that there's probably people out there who have, the last time they seriously investigated some of these options was, at some point in the past where the story was a little different than it is today, either in terms of, the cost of services or the capabilities of the technology and what that really means for, for the effort involved or the types of services that can be done.
Yeah, Jason, I think that's a fair statement. And one of the things that I personally see, and I always joke back to my days of physical hardware and sizing for an organization, that organization would spend a lot of money on physical hardware and only use 20% of it. In today's world, the technology advancements, we're actually now seeing what you are spending, you are consuming. And I think that is a huge change in the technology prism, if you will.
Yeah, it makes me think of from 15 years ago, an enterprise software project. There was always a day when the hardware team kind of walked in to lay out for everyone here's what you're going to be buying to size this properly, and that was like a whole stage of project, which is really nothing like today's environment.
Correct.
And the tools in place within the cloud infrastructure, particularly in the public cloud arena, it's constantly telling you as a IT user, IT end user, that your workload is either oversized or whatever the case may be, enabling you to continuously reduce that size. And the other great part about the public cloud is the costs and the economies of scale are constantly going down. So it's making it an even more a more important choice from a cost perspective than ever.
Great. Well, I think we are ready to wrap up. Russ, David, Pete, it's been great having a chance to sit down and chat with you on some of these issues. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. Absolutely a pleasure.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Russ Riley, David Bowles, and Pete Loach of DXC Technology for speaking with me today. To connect with our guest speakers or to learn more about DXC's work with organizations on building a digital workforce, call 877-651-6193 or email dxceclipse@dxc.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.